As Scottish mountaineer Greg Boswell gazed upon the Canadian Rockies, a new goal came into focus. The peak known as Wilson, towering at over 3,200 meters, called to him. Despite his young age of only 24 in 2015, Greg had already conquered many peaks, but this one held a special allure. He was determined to reach the summit, no matter the cost. He was accompanied by the 49-year-old Welshman Nick Bullock. On November 30th, they found themselves at the base of their climb, a footpath leading them towards the summit. But as they ventured further, the path grew increasingly treacherous. A formidable wall of rock stood before them, a daunting obstacle in their path to the peak. It was clear that this would not be an easy climb, but they were determined to reach the summit. Undeterred by the towering wall of rock before them, Greg and Nick set to work. They carefully unpacked their equipment and stretched the ropes, preparing for the climb ahead. With a steady determination, Greg led the way, his eyes scanning the rock face for the perfect holds. They moved slowly but with purpose, Nick following closely behind. Before they knew it, they found themselves on top of the peak, victorious. They decided to leave the ropes behind in order to save time on the descent. They had brought extra equipment, and it would be easier for them to progress without the added burden. As they pressed forward, a dense forest loomed before them. They knew that going around it would cost them valuable time, so they made the decision to traverse straight through the trees. As they pushed deeper into the forest, the going proved to be slow and treacherous. After 15 minutes of struggling, they realized that their climbing spikes and axes were proving to be more hindrance than help. They made the decision to leave them behind, opting instead to bring only the essentials: snowshoes, walking sticks, and some food and water. They had planned to camp for the night and continue their journey the next day. Now they were simply scouting the terrain ahead. As they walked across the frozen snow, Greg and Nick felt a sense of ease and freedom. But as they journeyed deeper into the wilderness, they soon realized that the darkness was creeping in. There was no point in continuing on, they decided. They would set up camp and rest for the night. They turned back, following their tracks. But as they retraced their steps, they noticed something strange. Paw prints, large and ominous, stretched across the snow. Greg felt a shiver run down his spine, but quickly regained his composure, reminding himself that they were in Canada, home to many wild animals. As they continued on, Greg decided to take off his snowshoes, assuming that the snow was solid enough for him to walk without them. But soon they realized that the snow was becoming softer, and they were sinking up to their knees. Nick took the lead, and Greg followed closely behind, but something caught his attention, and he turned around. What he saw would haunt him for the rest of the life. A massive grizzly bear appeared before him. In that moment of terror, Greg had just enough time to shout a warning to Nick: "Bear!" Without hesitation, he ran, or at least tried to. But without his snowshoes, the mountaineer was quickly stuck in the soft snow up to his knees. He collapsed, desperately trying to crawl and drag himself away. But there was no escaping the charging animal. As the bear approached, it let out a deafening roar. Greg couldn't believe what he was seeing, the massive body of the animal hurtling towards him in a matter of seconds. In a moment of pure instinct, he raised his leg and kicked the bear in the muzzle. But this only enraged the animal further. It crushed his boot with its jaws and pulled it off his foot. The two locked eyes for a moment, and then the bear spat out the boot and charged again. This time it latched onto his shin with its powerful jaws. The beast dragged Greg away, the mountaineer's screams of pain echoing through the wilderness. He tried to fight back, but it was to no avail, the bear's powerful jaws tearing at his flesh, crushing his bone. At one point, the bear lifted him off the ground and slammed him back into the snow, leaving him surrounded by a sea of white. The grizzly bear had no intention of letting go of its prey, and as it pushed down on Greg's other leg, the mountaineer's mind began to clear. He started hitting the animal's muzzle with his hand, roaring with all his might, and hitting again. His glove fell off, and he felt something wet on his hand. Suddenly, the grip on his leg loosened. In a moment of sheer determination, Greg somehow managed to insert his hand into the beast's mouth and prized apart the jaws, pushing and screaming, causing it to release its grip on his leg. It looks like he hurt the beast somehow. The bear snorted in pain and pulled back a little. He could only watch in terror as the bear stood over him, its fangs bloody with his own blood. He tried to protect himself with his hand, but it was a futile gesture. Suddenly he felt something on his head, the hiking lamp he carried with him. It had switched off during the tumbling and throwing. Without thinking, he pressed the button. The lamp came to life, shining bright in the face of the bear. As the bright light disoriented the animal, Greg locked eyes with the grizzly for what felt like an eternity. Time seemed to stand still as the beast turned and disappeared into the forest. The mountaineer barely managed to get up, and as he slowly took one step at a time, he stumbled towards his companion Nick, who was waiting a safe distance away, too scared to approach while the bear was still present. Greg was surprised that he could even stand on his leg, but he pushed on, his determination to survive driving him forward. As he reached Nick, he could see the pure terror etched on his companion's face, but all Greg could think of was getting out of there, running in the opposite direction of the grizzly. But they couldn't go in the opposite direction. It was Nick who came to his senses first, realizing that they had to make their way to the other side, to return to the beginning of the climb. It had taken them several hours to reach this point, and now with Greg's injuries, the journey back seemed even more daunting. They made their way through the forest, with Greg leading the way, in fear that his injured leg might get stuck in the snow. Every time he moved a branch or a twig, he would startle in fear, imagining that the beast was waiting to finish him off. The minutes seemed to stretch on forever as they made their way through the wilderness, each step a struggle. The fear of the unknown and the memory of the grizzly bear were constantly present in their mind. As they approached the spot where they had left their axes, Greg felt a sense of relief wash over him. If nothing else, they would at least have a means to defend themselves. They followed their tracks, which were still visible, but as they progressed, they suddenly froze in place. There, right in front of them, were paw prints across their tracks. They stopped, observing their surroundings, gripping their axes tightly. Though they saw no sign of the animal, they knew they were being followed. It was then that Greg spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "We're following the damned grizzly." Soon they found themselves at the rock, the ropes still in place. At least they wouldn't have to waste time reinstalling them. Greg went first, tying himself up and swinging over the edge. For a few moments he hung over the abyss, taking in the breathtaking view. He knew that he was safe now. The beast couldn't possibly reach him here. Nick's voice pulled him back to reality, reminding him that they needed to hurry. They were constantly looking over their shoulders, worried that a grizzly would jump out from somewhere. Greg continued to descend, soon reaching the foot of the mountain. Nick followed closely behind. They could still see their tracks, and the way was clear. They felt a sense of relief wash over them as they realized that there were no animals in sight. They kept their axes at the ready, not letting their guard down until they were far away from that place. For hours, they dragged themselves towards the place where they had left their vehicle, occasionally letting out a loud roar, a warning to any wild animals that may be nearby. As they progressed, they could still see their tracks. They stopped to rest, but the silence was deafening. All they could hear was the sound of their own breathing. And then, a roar echoed through the darkness, followed by another, and then howling. A pack of wolves was close by, drawn to the smell of blood. They froze in place, knowing that the beasts were closing in. They quickly gathered their strength and moved on, the blades of their axes shining in the moonlight. With every ounce of strength they had left, they dragged themselves to the vehicle. Greg immediately jumped in and locked the door, while Nick quickly put his backpack in the trunk, got behind the wheel, and hit the gas. They were determined to get to the hospital as quickly as possible. A few hours later, Greg was finally relieved. The journey was over, and they had made it out alive, but the memory of the terrifying encounter would stay with them forever. Thank you for watching. If you thought this video was interesting, you may also like some of the other videos available on our channel.